Terrific. Now, hopefully everyone can see the screen all right. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and thank Thad for setting this up. Today we're going to go through the importance of file and folder level encryption, pretty much around the whys, the wherefores, and of course what we do at SmartEncrypt to help organisations protect their data as such. So Thad and I will be a little bit interactive, if that's okay by everyone, during this presentation, because I think discussion points are really important. And I'd really encourage people to pop questions into the chat as we go, and as we get to the end of the presentation, we'll go through those questions. And if we've got enough time, I can even show you a quick demo of what SmartEncrypt can do based on what we've been talking about during this this presentation for you, this webinar. So with that, let's get stuck into it. Currently, the world's changed a lot, right, in the last couple of years, and we're dealing with a business landscape that's very different from what it looked like, say 2019, 2018. We're not just talking about the whole COVID thing, but of course, geopolitical situations have intensified, and the criminal landscape is evolving as well, and always has been too. No surprises there. We've got everyone working from home, or not everyone, but a lot of people are still working from home. I've had the pleasure of being in Melbourne and Sydney over the last couple of weeks doing Essential 8 talks to crowds, and it has struck me, just how easy it is to get around those two cities at the moment, and I was expecting to be a heck of a lot harder than it used to be. Now, level set, I'm from Adelaide, so it's always easy to get around the city. So yeah, there's a lot of change that's happened over the last few years, and that change is still happening. But what that's done is, of course, it's really increased the attack surface for our adversaries, the bad guys, right, at the end of the day. So there's a few things that are top of mind, and that's things like, how can we do remote work better, right? We're still grappling with that in general across the board, and it doesn't matter whether it's enterprise or SMB. We still have the same problems. It's just what scale that is, and also making sure that everyone's connected and staying productive while they're at it too. I know a lot of people are trying to get people back into work. There's a bit of resistance. We'll see how that goes. The other side of it is, how are we ensuring the data and the devices in that distributed environment is a bit of a problem for us as well. I mean, once again, it always has been. It's just been amplified over the last few years. And on top of that, lastly, there's how do we manage the cost, right? At the end of the day, how do we do things effectively and the most cost effectively? So these are the things that we're kind of facing at a really high level.
I think that intellectual property one too, on that previous slide, is a big one, and that was a problem pre-COVID. Walking away with customer lists or research data, things that the organization has paid for with that employee salaries, and they just take it up on a USB and walk away.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think every organization has some sort of story with lost intellectual property.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. Very true, Thad. Thank you. So how has the world changed, right? And how's that led to the increase in cyber attacks? And I've got this slide because this is something we used a couple of years ago, and I think it's really relevant to point out, that if I was, in 2020, 2021, this is great, these are predictions. I've left the slide in because it shows those predictions happened, right? At the end, like we're now in 2023, we were saying, Deloitte's were saying, well, the world's focused on the whole COVID-19 thing. The cyber criminals are going to undoubtedly capitalize on the crisis. Bingo, they did. We've seen that, more recently in Australia with, some of the high-profile enterprise hits that we've taken. I won't name names. We all know who they are. But it's not just the enterprise; it's also SMB that's being attacked as well. And we'll go into that in a little bit further. And of course, things like continuity, remote work, planning for transition to the next normal. Well, we're kind of in the next normal. but we're still transitioning, interestingly enough. I don't think we've done that fully. So we still have a lot of problems when it comes to cybersecurity and risk with the transition that we've been doing. And you would have thought that perhaps we might have been able to move faster, but it's more an evolution rather than a revolution, although it's a quick evolution at this point in time. So looking at the predictions that we were doing back in 2020, or some of the comments that were made in 2020, and you go to what's being said currently about where we're going to be in 2025 and where we are last year, some things really stand out massively in my head. So it's predicted that by 2025 there's going to be 175 zettabytes of data. Now, not too many people on this call will actually get their head around 175 followed by 21 zeros. Personally, that does my head in. That's a huge, I mean, that's just, you may as well just look up at the universe, and the stars. It's really hard to comprehend the amount of information that we're producing, and the amount of information within that's actually extremely sensitive, and sensitive to individuals, sensitive to business, and sensitive to governments. The other one that sticks out in my head is the 65,000 vulnerabilities that were found in 2022. So 65,000 vulnerabilities were discovered by basically the white hats at the end of the day. So that's not even including what was found by the black hats or the actual threat actors that haven't been disclosed and are being currently weaponized. That's a lot of vulnerabilities. And then the last one, which is also a really interesting statistic, and I've been looking at this one for quite some considerable amount of time, is the human element. And so 82% of the data breaches, the root cause was the human element or the human interaction. So that number changes from year to year, but realistically speaking, it sits in this variance of between 80% and 95%. So, we deal with people every day, and people can't be on their toes 100% of the time. And so that is a big problem for us.
I think they're getting much more targeted too, Scott, and like their spear phishing campaigns, and they might use a general phishing campaign to come in and weed out who's more vulnerable within the organization. But the idea that you'll always spot a spear phishing campaign, it's just not going to happen. I think we've both seen some pretty good ones, and it's Telstra.net, and at first glance when you're on your mobile or something else, you don't notice these at all, and that's why that human element, I think, will keep coming up, and you just won't be able to train your users out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And hold that thought, Thad, because in a couple of slides we're going to go through some information around the threat actors, right?
Yep.
And we'll discuss it a little bit further. So what are the consequences of the changes for business, right? Essentially, these security attacks have real economic consequences for small business and enterprise, right? And it depends on the level of risk and the level of maturity of the attackers aiming or targeting business, right, as well. But the reality is 66% of small business have experienced attack in the last year. That, once again, that number is really interesting because I have not seen that go below 50%, and I haven't seen it hit above 70%. So it seems to be this, this constant pressure applied to SMBs. It is different in the enterprise space because the enterprise space is constantly attacked, and because of the amount of data the enterprise has, and the value of that data as well. So they face bigger problems, but of course, with enterprise tends to have a larger budget for security as well. So more controls in place. So just throwing it out there that we have to keep that in mind at both ends. There's another statistic that basically that one survey done showed that 48% of businesses, and if I go back to this one here, 43% of the attacks were aimed at SMBs in a particular survey. Given we've got the links to these, so once we share this, you'll have all the sources for the information. But what was really interesting about it was only 14% are prepared. And there's a really big difference between enterprise and SMB, because the SMB tends to be fairly underprepared for the types of attacks that are happening at the moment, and so are a really soft target. Now, what's another interesting fact about that is that SMB sits in the supply chain of enterprise, and supply chain attacks are predicted to be, one of the heavy routes to market for the threat actors over the next few years as well. And we've seen supply chain attacks happening, and very effective ones, the last 2-3 years. But that is predicted to increase quite significantly. And of course, if you're doing a supply chain attack, who are you going after? Essentially, you're going after the soft targets first. In one of the Essential 8 conversations we were having last week, the attack on the Bureau of Meteorology came up, and people sat back and said, well, why the heck was the bomb attacked? Well, because it's weather, who cares, right? At the end of the day, what's the big deal? Well, back then when the bomb was attacked, and this is only surmising and theories, this is not proof points, this is not knowledge of, inside knowledge of what happened at all in any way, shape or form, so I put the caveat out there. But some of the theories that came out around that was that, around the time Australia was involved in the climate change accord in Paris, and nation states might wanted to have had a leg up on what we might or might not be saying at that particular event. And one of the best ways of doing that, if you're talking about climate change, is what's the Bureau of Meteorology saying, right? What are they advising government on? So that's one. Two, the other thing, so I'm just setting the scene for you, so you're thinking within your own organisation, what are the sort of things that could happen to you, right? Why would you be targeted, right? The other one was that, of course, the Bureau does feed everyone information, including defence, government, commercial, doesn't really matter what it is, shipping lanes, blah, blah, blah. And so by having an in or becoming an advanced persistent threat within the bomb network, that would give whoever the threat actor was, or the advanced persistent threat was, the ability to try to get into other people's systems via the connections that the bomb has. And so, it's more about lateral movement across organisations, to achieve the targets they want to achieve. Now, we can sit back and say, well, bombs government, it's big, but a flip side of that coin is that there's plenty of SMBs in the world that deal with government departments because of whatever it is, grants, loans, services that they're offering, that type of scenario. So once again, become a bit of a target for attacks. And exfiltrating the data. So that's a really, I guess, the key piece to this is getting data exfiltrated.
Even if you look at some of the ransomware that has gone through and hit some of the NAS devices out there, it was mostly SMB NASs that were affected, and we got plenty of phone calls saying, "Oh, how do we reverse this?" And it's like, well, there's no reversing it except for starting over with your data. You have to prepare for it from the beginning, and they just were not prepared, sort of thing. And we're talking, that not that much data, but it'd be invoices weren't there, pay slips, and so on.
Exactly, enough to have a real negative impact on the organisation, right? And downtime in an SMB for a number of days is the equivalent to a month for an enterprise, and it's significant cost, and it is a business closing event in some cases, right? So I'm going to go into who the perpetrators are, and I'm doing this for a reason, right? So the perpetrators, I've taken this from there's plenty of different models around cyber threat actors and what they are. They're all very, very similar. I've actually taken this from the Canadian government's their basically Centre for Cybersecurity, and how they describe it. The reason why I've done it is I've done it for two reasons. It's a nice little diagram that basically shows the motivations of the threat actors at different levels. And two, I don't think the Canadians get enough airtime. But realistically speaking, there's plenty of these models, and the Australian Cybersecurity Centre has its own, very similar again. You'll find the Five Eyes, US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand are all very similar when it comes to representing who the threat actors are. But the reality is you've got your nation state sponsored actors, threat actors. They could be a cyber criminal gang that is actually employed by governments to do nefarious work on their behalf. Their motivations are geopolitical. We'll come back to this one. There are cyber criminals. That's what we all think of in general. Cyber criminals are out there trying to make a profit, turn a dollar, turn a coin. Fair enough. You've got the hacktivists, which are ideological in nature. So from a motivation perspective, you do have terrorist groups. Once again, that's ideological, but generally intending to cause harm while they're at it. I'll come back to that again. Thrill seekers, which back in the day you used to call them script kiddies, and of course the insider threat, which Thad did talk about earlier. From exfiltrating data, moving from one job to another, trying to get a leg up within organisations by knowledge, right? Knowledge is power. So realistically speaking, I guess what most of us concentrate in a business world on is the cyber criminal and the insider threat. There's two areas that we kind of are top of mind for us. What's really interesting about that is that nation state sponsored actors, threat actors, are targeting business. They're not just targeting governments and defence. So the cyber warfare waged by nation states pretty much keeps the head of the CIA's Centre of Cyber Intelligence, Andrew Boyd, up at night. Now, Andrew Boyd did an interview, and I would highly recommend listening to it, on risky business. If you don't subscribe to that podcast, you should. If you like spy movies and you like cybersecurity, and it's a bit interesting to you, risky business is actually really good to listen to. It has some really good guests, and as you can see with the caliber of Andrew Boyd, some pretty high-level guests as well. The thing about that interview with Andrew Boyd is it's not just the attacks on the government that keeps Andrew up at night. It's the attacks on business by other nation states. And those attacks on business are designed to exfiltrate information for various reasons. One of those reasons is to get a leg up economically. And that's a really important thing, because as a nation, we need to do our best to protect us individually, as businesses, and by doing that, we improve the overall cyber resilience of the country itself while we're at it. So don't think for a moment that nation state attacks only sit at government level, right? The Australian National University Education Unit, that was attacked by a nation state sponsored threat actor. The reason why they did that attack was simply because the ANU held so much data around future prime ministers, future politicians, future business leaders, that once again it gives, and past, it would give them the ability to target those individuals wherever they are, within business, within government, on their journey through life, and use them as an asset, right, for their end goals at the end of the day. So hopefully I haven't laboured on that point too much, but they're the perpetrators.
It is a huge concern, right? And like there's some research institutes and some other orgs that do hold lots of data that is personal, fallen in the wrong hand. We're talking petabytes of data that they have hosted on premise. They should be looking to protect that in every way they can.
Absolutely.
And even external and internal threats, right? So that is a very important point.
And Thad, the other part to that too is that each one of these types of threat actors have a different maturity level as well. Just like we do in our journey in cybersecurity, there are different maturity levels, right? If you look at the Essential 8 model's got a maturity model. That Essential 8 maturity model is based around the type of attack that is targeted at business or at government, right? And so, the real level 0 is basically, your defenses really don't meet need, right? Is what it boils down to, right? Anyone can attack you and you will get done. Level 1 is really around attackers who use commodity items to do it. It's what I call the spray and pray, right? Just standard old mass phishing attacks, scams. You get on your mobile phones, you get into your emails to try and trick you into putting your credentials into a site and stealing it. They don't care who they hit everyone, because if they get a small percentage of it, then it's lucrative for them at the end of the day. Level 2, they're starting to get a little more sophisticated, and what they're doing is that they're actually starting to test the defences of organisations, and then use tradecraft to circumvent those defences. Right? It's still a bit spray and pray. It's still a little bit sort of commoditized, but it's a little bit more targeted, right, while they're at it. A little bit more sophisticated. And then you get to level 3. Level 3 is, no, I'm only going after this particular organisation. I'm doing all the social engineering in the world around that organisation because I've done the research, and I'm going to become an advanced persistent threat in there for 2-3 years if I possibly can. So that's kind of how the Essential 8 maturity model works in a nutshell, right? 10,000-foot overview of how
we do have a question.
Yeah, sure.
From Joshua. Is encryption included in the Essential 8?
No, encryption is not included in the Essential 8. So I'll get to this. Actually, let's come back to that. No, actually, I'll talk about it now. Right, so Essential 8, the thing about the Essential 8 is that it wasn't the Essential 8, a number of years ago. It was the top 4. And before the top 4, it wasn't a top 4, it was an ISM, or is an ISM. So it all comes, the Essential 8 comes out of the Australian Information Security Manual. The Australian Information Security Manual was 35 mitigation strategies developed by the Signals Directorate, the DSD, back in the day, and they were mitigation strategies designed to prevent targeted cyber security incidents in FedGov and Defence. Now I can throw a whole bunch of other acronyms at you. You've got the PSPF, you've got the DPSPF, so Federal Government Security Policy Framework, and Defence has its own. They all lead into the ISM, the Information Security Manual. The Information Security Manual had all these mitigation strategies, and what happened was the DSD and became the ASD, the Australian Signals Directorate. They basically looked at the ISM and said, okay, well, hang on, out of all these mitigation strategies, what would have prevented the incidents that we've responded to? And so they worked out there were 4 mitigation strategies that did that. And this isn't about the Essential 8 today, so I'm not going to go into that. But essentially those 4 mitigation strategies could have prevented 85% of the attacks. So they called them the top 4. Now, times change. And attacks change, and our adversaries, our threat actors, they develop and they mature as well, just like we do in business. So what they ended up doing is they added another 4, right, to the essential category, because they said, well, actually, these 4 mitigation strategies also would have helped prevent, right? And therefore they become the baseline of really good security to prevent an attack and to recover from one, right? And the reason why I wanted to come back to it is it's really interesting, because backup, if you think about backup is recovery, and yet it's in the Essential 8. So it's like, okay, we've been attacked, it's been successful, how do we recover, right? I actually predict at some point that it is going to end up being a top 10, and I do believe that encryption will get there, right? And the reason why I say that is because of these adversaries and the way the climate has changed. We've moved from I'm going to start jumping around over these slides now, right? But we've moved from ransomware to extortionware, all right? We're focusing on the impact of the cybersecurity. What is the impact, right? How are people doing things, and what are they doing, and then what does it mean to us as businesses? Because it's all about risk at the end of the day. What is the risk to us, right? And if you look at those stats, they're pretty impactful, right? 60% of business have been hit by ransomware. Once again, 60%. That number changes from year to year, right? And it's once again pretty much 60% or above at any given point in time. I'm going to labour on this point a bit. The interesting part of that is that ransomware used to be encryption only. And a number of years back, I did an article on this before ransomware got into extortionware. And I basically said, hey, look, in 2 years' time, what we'll be seeing is that it won't be just the encryption, it'll be the exfiltration of data. And then you'd be hit twice by the ransomware gangs, right, the cyber criminals. So what's going to happen is that they're going to hit you for, look, pay us a ransom to decrypt the information you have so you can come back really, really quickly. Oh, and by the way, we've got all your data up on the deep and dark, and we're going to release it to your customers, to your competitors, and to the general public, right? Unless you pay us another ransomware, and we guarantee we'll give you that information back before we release it on the deep and dark. Guess what's happened? We've all seen what happened with Optus and Medibank. These were ransoms. It was on the deep and dark. They were releasing the information. So it's gone beyond just the encryption piece, where backup's really, really important to be able to recover your data. But it's gone to exfiltration. Now, backup cannot save you from that, right? So these are the things that we have to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Scott.
Okay.
Essentially, SmartEncrypt solves these problems.
Yeah, exactly right. So we're going to talk about SmartEncrypt, right? And I guess before we do, once again, I'm going to labour on the point of the exfiltration of data. Exfiltration of data by insiders, by our own people, and also by threat actors, which are not just cyber criminals but nation state sponsored. Less the terrorist sort of side of things, definitely the script kiddies, or the thrill seekers, should I say. They're kind of like the three areas that we want to take a look at when it comes to the exfiltration of data. So this is where SmartEncrypt was born from, right? Is to create a solution that helps all businesses, whether they're enterprise or SMB, to be able to protect that data while it's at rest or on the move at a granular level, right? Without becoming a burden, right, to operations. So how does it do it? Essentially, SmartEncrypt is a next-gen file encryption. It has true persistent encryption. So it doesn't matter whether the files are moved, whether they're emailed, they're saved to a USB, whether they're sitting on a file share, whether they're up in SharePoint, OneDrive, doesn't really matter, right? That encryption is persistent across all of those places. It allows for being able to actually share files, right? So files in transit, right? So essentially, you can encrypt the data in transit to its destination, and that destination doesn't have to be internal; it can be external as well. And it does it in such an easy way that it just makes life, seamless for users. As I said about the cloud storage side of life, it does encrypt in cloud storage, specifically in the SharePoint and the OneDrive side of life, and also Teams now, because that is what most businesses are using. So that's kind of what SmartEncrypt is concentrated on doing for us. And of course, it's added that two-factor authentication layer as well to identify and validate, who's encrypting and who's not encrypting and who's got access to the information. That's pretty much what SmartEncrypt is, right? How it works? Well, SmartEncrypt runs.
Which 2FAs does it work with?
At the moment, Microsoft's multi-factor authentication. It also does SSO as well on it too. Yeah, we can get more into the details later, given time.
We did have a question. We can jump on this one.
Yep.
I know we are going to come up with this later too. Can we share encrypted files with our colleagues, even cross-platform? Assuming means across Windows and Mac or Linux devices.
Yep, correct. Yes, you can. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So it actually works the way how SmartEncrypt works is that it runs 256-bit encryption, right, on the files. The data itself is encrypted with company control keys. So it's not SmartEncrypt controls keys, it's company controlled keys, but they are stored securely on the web. There is an agent that's used with it. That agent, basically people log into the agent. The agent then communicates back with the cloud service to say, what's the profile that I am, right? And I've done all the authentication, the authorization that I need to do. What's my profile? What keys am I assigned? What groups am I assigned into? And by the way, then what information in different places is encrypted using that I have access to. I bring this up because it's really important. One of the things about SmartEncrypt is not just an encryption tool, it's a really low-level data access governance tool as well while you're at it. So if you're looking actually governing access to data, and you're not using a big data access governance tool like a Netrix or a Stealth Bits or a Varonis or something along those lines, SmartEncrypt can actually get you part of the way there, not all the way. Won't say it does everything because it doesn't, right? But it does actually govern the access to encrypted data. So for any sensitive information that you have that you need quick and easy data access governance on, the simplest way of doing it is actually encrypting the data and then assigning the keys to groups or users, right, on it. And so now you've achieved not only data protection, but also data governance as well while you're at it, or data access governance, sorry. Encrypting files then becomes seamless because you can create rules. And so anything that's lobbed into a particular directory, into a folder or whatever, can be encrypted automatically without sort of interaction. And of course, then you can control who has access, within the firewall and beyond the firewall, right? No matter where the data lies. That's pretty much how SmartEncrypt operates or how it works. Now, you've got to be smart about the way we do encryption, right? So there's a few things here. Unencrypted data is a gold mine. We've seen it 101 times. People exfiltrate the data, they release it on the web, they get millions of dollars from the victims, or they do millions of dollars worth of damage to the victims if the victims don't pay up, which we are getting more and more in tune with. And that's another point. I do get sidetracked, so apologies. That is another point because just on that, cyber insurance is cracking down on the requirements to be able to get cyber insurance. The premiums are going up, and the reason why the premiums are going up is we've been paying ransoms, right, to get our data back, because we haven't had the protections in place, and we haven't had the backups that we should have had in place either while we're at it to recover. So Australia as a nation tends to pay ransoms, interestingly enough. What that does is drive up cyber insurance premiums and also the cyber insurance requirements that we have too. So this is one of those things that when I said I think there's going to be a top 10, I think encryption will come into it. There's reasons for it, right? The reasons for it are that it's costing the economy a heck of a lot of money.
I think, we were even chatting about it before the webinar too, is even in the consumer side of the industry, protecting your PII when sending it to the bank or to the real estate agent or a lawyer, right? A lot of those times those emails aren't encrypted if you're just sending it from G Suite or Hotmail or wherever you're sending it. And something like SmartEncrypt gives you that capability to send it over encrypted and securely, right?
Yep.
And without that encryption key or the PIN to unlock the encryption, you're emailing a brick, essentially, right? We do have a question here from Bill. Do you have to have connection to the web to open an encrypted file locally? You don't have access to the internet.
No. There are safeguards in place. So there's what it's called an OTP. And so that OTP allows you to access the files if you have no connectivity whatsoever. There are also safeguards in place also where you can take all the encryption keys that sit within SmartEncrypt in a JSON. You can then put that into a vault, something like a secret server or something along those lines to protect it, or an HSM or whatever. And if if the worst case scenario happened and the world was blowing up all over the show, for all those doomsday preppers on this call, you essentially you would then be able to start the agent again and use those and assign the encryption key to the agent, right? Drop the encryption key into the agent directory. That would automatically pick up the encryption key, and you would then be able to decrypt your data. So we have put safeguards in place for people as well to be able to recover their data if they need to, given the worst case scenarios. Yep. So
I think the big thing is if your CEO or director or whomever is on a plane, right, and he needs to open up that PowerPoint for that presentation on the way to wherever he's going, that he is able to work on that, right?
Yep.
And that's probably the biggest hurdle for users.
Yeah, there's a couple of hurdles, and we'll get into them in a second as well on that one. So I won't, everyone can read the screen, so I won't go through every bullet point on here. But the reality is the thing with encryption is that you do need to be able to make it as easy as possible, right? For people and for users, and as hard as possible for the cyber criminals. And that's what SmartEncrypt gives us, right? That's what it's been designed to do. So some of the challenges around that are the complexity, the design, and the way people use files, right? So generally with encryption tools, I mean, look, I'm a big advocate for encryption, right? I really am. And there's different levels of encryption, or different ways of doing encryption. And I don't mean the algorithms used, and whether it's symmetric, asymmetric encryption, you know, I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is whether you're doing disk level encryption, whether you're doing file and folder level encryption, whether you're doing application level encryption, right? The thing is, disk level encryption is great if you get drunk and leave the laptop on the back of a taxi and someone gets hold of it and they rip the disk out and they try to access the information. Wonderful, right? Not so much if you're currently using the data, right? or you're currently using the device. It is disk level encryption and volume level encryption. Encryption is the cheapest way of doing things, and it's also the most basic, right? Good, tick. File and folder level encryption gives you another level of usability, but it also increases complexity of the way you're doing your encryption. And it also generally will increase the cost as well. In the past, it has been more expensive to do. And then we get to application, and that's probably the best way of doing things at the end of the day, but it's also the most complex, the hardest to manage, hardest to control, gives you the highest level of protection in reality from an encryption perspective. But most businesses, don't have the resources, the knowledge, the time to be able to use application encryption easily and cost effectively. And so that's where file and folder level encryption comes into it, because you know, we can address the usability issues, and typically hasn't been done in the past, but with SmartEncrypt we certainly did. In general, it wasn't designed for simplicity. Well, we knocked that on the head, right? It was designed ground up for the simplicity of use. Keys management, we've basically made that super simple. Once again, it's a big problem in general. You know, managing the ownership of keys, public keys, private keys, you know, all that sort of scenario adds to complexity and becomes quite difficult, especially when you have large volumes of keys that you're dealing with. And of course, from a price perspective, you know, and an implementation perspective, an ongoing management perspective, the cost is driven up too. So in the past, people have looked at all these problems with file and folder level encryption, you know, in their heads and gone, and to a degree rightfully so, and said, well, actually, I'm going to put this down my list of priorities, right? And, you know, because backup, most important thing, because ransomware and that sort of stuff was doing the encryption, and that's all it was doing. Times changed. We've made a product that actually makes all of that quite simple, has really brought the cost of it down, as in from a product perspective, but also from a management perspective, has made it super simple, gives it that high level protection, removes all the user resistance, which is extremely important when you're doing an encryption product. You know, you need to have user buy-in, ease of use for the users, and so what we've done is just kind of mitigate those problems per se. If you didn't have products like SmartEncrypt, I know this is a plug for SmartEncrypt, but if you didn't have products like SmartEncrypt available, then that old attitude is increasing the level of risk that we have in today's environment. Right, and not just today's environment, tomorrow's as well, the way things are developing. So I've probably actually gone over the benefits just then. So it is the cost effective. It gets rid of the risk with persistent encryption, because there is always a level of risk when you have persistent encryption. I did touch on some of those areas, like for instance things like OTPs and the ability to back up the keys and then reuse them to decrypt in the event of a disaster or an emergency. It aids in securing your remote workers and the information, at least, that the remote workers are using. That's really important in our current business environment that we have. The setup is really easy, and we'll get into this in a second. and it enables users to work as usual. Now that's key, right? That piece is really, really key, is not to get in the way of the way users typically operate. So what are the workflows? Now, this probably isn't, in fact, maybe you can tell me if this is showing up large enough on the screen or not. But the way,
yeah, look,
sort of, or you only need to see the headers.
Yeah.
You only need to see the headers. So the way SmartEncrypt works from a workflow perspective has been designed to make things easy. When you first log into SmartEncrypt, you essentially set up access, right? And that access basically is agent at the agent level and also at the console level for the administrators and what have you. And it will do things like, enforcing two-factor authentication, allowing single sign-on, geo-IP blocking, so blocking from particular regions if you don't ever have anyone traveling to, I don't know, I'm going to pick on Azerbaijan just because I love the name of that country. But if you don't have people lobbing into Lithuania or whatever it is, right? Then you can actually block access from those geo IPs with it. Password strengths, complexities, all that sort of stuff is where you set it up. One page and that's it. The next stage is you add your users, and whether you import the users or whether you do it manually, it's up to you, but the facility is there. Once you've added the users, you create your keys. So you've got your keys, and at that point you go, okay, what are the rules that we're doing, right? So what are the actual rules of where we are encrypting? What are the shares that we're encrypting? What SharePoint sites, what SharePoint folders are we encrypting? What OneDrives are we encrypting? Are we doing it locally on people's machines? Are we allowing users to encrypt their own files in different directories as well while we're at it? And then what you do is you assign the rules and the keys to users and groups. So you can drop users into groups to make management really, really easy. Logically, in smaller organizations, it might be finance group, it might be sales group, it might be tech group, it might be janitorial group, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is you create groups, you give the groups a key, and then you use that key against certain assets, right, that you want to protect, or certain information assets you want to protect. That's it. There's your workflow. You're done. So you can be up and going in about 15 minutes with SmartEncrypt. The next stage is at the user level. What does it look like? So I've taken a snapshot here of a little demo folder that I have. And you can see on this snapshot, hopefully if the icons are large enough, that each of these icons have a little SmartEncrypt logo on it. And what that signifies is that SmartEncrypt has encrypted these files. But you can still see the underlying file type is still a WinZip, it's still a PDF, it's still a Word doc or an HTML file, whatever it is. It's still the file that it has always been. And so if I were to click on any one of those files, nothing extra would happen apart from the file opening up in its native application. So it's not getting in the way. The encryption remains persistent the whole time. Now, if I want to then share this with someone who may not have the same level of access from an encryption perspective, all I have to do is right-click, go properties, nowadays go show more, hit the SmartEncrypt part, and then I can decrypt the file, or I can do a protect and share. So what's really interesting here, what I really love about SmartEncrypt is it's encrypted. I hit protect and share. What it does is it opens up the encrypted file in the background, generates an HTML version of that file that is fully encrypted. So it's actually, the HTML basically is the full-blown encryption and everything it needs, the application, the whole lot, to encrypt and decrypt that file. So once I've done that, I can send that to anyone via whatever mechanism I choose to, whether it's Teams, whether it's email, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's I don't know, whether it's a SharePoint share, doesn't really matter. I can send it to them in any way, shape or form I like. The other thing is I then send them the PIN that I've created. So what would happen is I would create a PIN. The PIN is actually used as the basis of the encryption key. That PIN I would send them via a different mechanism, and they would then decrypt the file, and they've got it. So in transit, we are protecting that file. Now think about it, about the real estate events that we've had where real estate transactions on property have been intercepted by man-in-the-middle attacks. That's someone sitting in the middle between point A and point B, intercepts the communications, takes the information, changes the information with their bank details, whatever else it is, it hits the other end end up paying in the wrong place, and then you lose hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. And that's happened quite a number of times in Australia over the last 4 years. That would never happen with SmartEncrypt if you were doing a protect and share. Because
sorry.
Scott,
we do have 2 questions here before we jump back into it. The first one's from Damon. Does it integrate with Active Directory, Azure AD, or is it limited to importing users?
No, it does interact with AD.
And then you can also upload via CSV as well.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then the second one from Adam here is, how does SmartEncrypt get handled in SharePoint OneDrive versions? Is it possible to recover from a point in time where the file is unencrypted?
Yeah, repeat the question.
How does SmartEncrypt get handled in SharePoint OneDrive versions? Is it possible to recover from a point in time where the file is unencrypted?
So, sorry, I guess I probably need clarification on that one, whether if SharePoint, or let's say OneDrive or SharePoint, the file is encrypted. Previous versions. Yeah. So if previous versions aren't encrypted, they aren't encrypted. If previous versions are encrypted, then they are encrypted. It doesn't matter, because when you open the file up, the file behaves exactly like it would whether it was encrypted or not encrypted. So your behavior within the OneDrive or the SharePoint Online side of life is still the same. The difference is that it has to be opened up. It will open up locally, right? So it will open up in the desktop app. That's the one caveat, is that you won't see it within the browser framework that you may use, right, with SharePoint or OneDrive. It will force opening up in the desktop app. But apart from that, the behavior is identical to what you would normally see. I'm not sure if that answered the question or not. So you could restore. So once again, you could restore from a previous version of that file. It's still holding all the previous version information that it would normally do.
2 more. Is it possible to exfiltrate based on recovering a previous version, however?
Is it? Well, no, because I mean, the fact of the matter is, if the only versions available for access are those versions that are encrypted, you're exfiltrating a brick. They can't open it, right?
And Anna had, if you have users in multiple groups, how do the encryption keys work? Are there multiple keys for each user group? Or can you only assign one encryption key per user group folder share?
No, you can assign multiple keys to groups, and you can assign multiple keys to users, and you can assign users into multiple keys and groups. So it's a many-to-many relationship when it comes to users, groups, and keys and rules. There are settings to prevent override of encryption rules and encryption keys. So if a particular key is used to encrypt, that key is used on a group, but you've got a user who's assigned to multiple groups, and that user wants to change the encryption on it, it will automatically prevent that from happening, because the rule is, ABC folder must be encrypted with finance key, right? You don't want any of those files being overwritten by a different key within that group, because essentially the group in the finance group needs access to all those files. So you can't have someone, like if I was in finance group but I was also in admin group, I wouldn't be able to then overwrite the finance encryption with an admin encryption, because otherwise I would block finance teams from being able to have access to that information. So you can control whether things can be overwritten or not overwritten at an encryption level as well. So there are, once again, safeguards in place for that. Right, so that gives you a really high-level overview. I mean, there's more to SmartEncrypt, and anyone who wants a demo of SmartEncrypt, we can certainly organise it. But just from a feature perspective, I think it was pretty important to show some of the features. This is not all of them, but essentially there are 3 different plans that we have with SmartEncrypt. I personally don't know anyone using Business Basic. Everyone uses Business Pro, pretty much, because it gives you all the stuff that I think every organization needs, quite frankly. And things like external file sharing, 2-factor authentication, offline access, basic reporting, those sort of things are standard across the board. But the things that really matter, things like single sign-on for ease of use, the advanced rule customizations, group management, device management. There's more to SmartEncrypt that I haven't gone into just because of length of time. But device management, password policy management, geo-blocking, all that sort of stuff is available in both the Business Pro plan and the Enterprise plan. Pretty much the difference between Enterprise and Business is the Enterprise is unlimited keys, and so it goes beyond 250 users. So that's generally the difference between the 2 levels at the moment on SmartEncrypt. And finally, so from a feature perspective, if you've got questions, ask me. But finally, one thing that I'd like to close with, considering I think we've only got 7 minutes left. Is that right, Ted?
We are running a little short on time here, but that's okay.
Yep. Okay. Is that security is A, not a one-size-fits-all. B, it's always evolving. And C, you got to layer your security. And I'll go back to that Essential 8 comment before around the Essential 8. The Essential 8 application control, patch applications, patch operating systems, restrict privilege, multi-factor authentication, restrict macros, harden user applications, and backup, right? That's your Essential 8. That evolved out of the Australian Information Security Manual and really started as the top 4. So we've seen the ISM get bigger. So now there's something like 40 mitigation strategies, I think, in the ISM, the Australian Information Security Manual. We went from top 4 being essential, or being the lynch hit. It used to be catch, patch, match was a catchphrase for it, into the Essential 8. The top 4 are still in the Essential 8, and it's still referenced in some areas as the top 4 within the Essential 8. We've got these maturity models. We've got the maturity models because we have different levels of threat actors and their sophistication and how they go after you. It's not about your sophistication, it's about your information, right? We've seen ransomware go from just encrypting to exfiltration. Ransomware is no longer ransomware, it's extortionware is what it is, right? And we're seeing it used by nation states, cyber criminals, thrill seekers, less to extent the insider threat because they've got more access, right? They're more privileged, so they've got more access to the information. They don't need to do that sort of stuff. They can just exfiltrate. So we've seen those changes, and we're seeing those changes continue to evolve, right? The threats are not getting less, they're getting bigger. And so once again, this is where I sit back and say, in reality, as a foundational security control or mitigation strategy, we really do need to be looking at file level encryption to protect the data from exposure, right? And whether that's accidental, whether it's insider threat, or whether it's malicious intent by an outsider, a bad actor outside, is irrelevant. At the end of the day, it's up to us to protect the data. We've got privacy laws that are increasing across the globe, and Australia is now starting to go down that path. And once again, I reckon it's only going to be 2 years before we actually have a GDPR style, might be longer because of the way things move through Parliament, but style regulation from a privacy perspective. We've got the notifiable data breaches scheme that came out in 2018? That was never there before, right? We've got the increase in penalties from data breaches happening with the Australian government that's now being pushed through, and is through, right, on because of the large scale events that have been happening. I mean, I can go on, but that progression, at the end of the day, if we are not governing the access that we give to the sensitive data and the sensitive information that we have, or the high value data that we have, and we're not protecting PII, personally identifiable information, then we will be held accountable. And one of the best ways we can do that is at that file encryption level, because it gives us both that protection from an exposure perspective, as well as insider threat. And on top of that, we're actually achieving a level of data access governance that we may or may not have had done before. Yeah, so layered security. And of course, we've had questions, but if we have any more, please go ahead.
Give everyone a few seconds here to shoot any questions. Scott, if you do want to jump to that next slide, just while anyone's typing.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Questions
Sure.
up. Yeah. So guys, we will be in contact if you did attend today, and we're happy to arrange a demo or even do a security workshop with you to talk about file and folder level encryption, or if we just want to have a general security chat, we always welcome those as well. But we will be in touch, or you can feel free to reach out to us as well. And then that next one, I think, is we'll have a giveaway here. We will have a winner announced within the next few days, where you'll be contacted if you won a NAS device that has a SmartEncrypt license included with it. So we will be in touch to give that away. Does any questions? It looks like no.
Looks like no.
I think we asked.
You're pretty much all along the way through. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, look, everyone, we really appreciate your time. See you on our next webinar series, and we'll be in touch shortly.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate your time.
Yes, the recording will be available. We'll post it on our website in the next few days. Thumbs up. Awesome. All right. Thanks. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Scott.
No problem. Thank you very much.